Welcome to the Self-Publishing School podcast. This is the podcast to listen to if you're an aspiring writer or an author who wants to be more successful. On this show, you'll learn how to write and launch a book successfully, all from the top authors and people just like you who are doing it at the highest level. I'm your host, Chandler Bolt, the founder of Self-Publishing School, the author of the book called Published, and the CEO of selfpublishing.com. For free training on how to publish a book that sells 10,000 copies, go to selfpublishing.com/free training. Hey, Chandler Bolt here, and joining me is Wahida Clark. Wahida is a 4 times New York Times bestselling author. She's been working with us at Self-Publishing School. She's written over a dozen books, and her novels include the wildly popular Thug series. She's got an amazing story. She started writing while in prison, which we're going to talk about, which I think is just unbelievable. So cool. She does amazing work in this space. She's created successful fiction series, raving fans. So we're going to be talking about that. So how do you create raving fans in a series? And how do you get the New York Times 4 times? So Wahida, welcome. Super excited to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Chandler. Thank you for doing what you do. If you look back there on the shelf, I have 2 copies of Published back there.
Yeah, that's awesome. Hey, so let's just dive straight in. Like, why did you decide to write your first book? And walk us through your story. I mean, you started writing while in prison, and then 4 times New York Times bestselling author. Like, walk us through why start writing a book? What did that process look like?
Sure. I was living in Georgia. I worked for this advertising firm. So when they came after the advertising firm, when they busted in the doors, they said, "Do you have the girl? Do you have the girl?" And I'm wondering who's the girl they're talking about. They were talking about me because I was the top salesperson. So we took it to trial. We lost, and I was sentenced to serve 10.5 years in federal prison. So once I got into prison, and when you're in the federal system, you have to wait till you get sentenced and everything, and then they send you to your destination so you can start doing your time. So I sat in Arizona for like 9 months to a year, and they finally sent me to my destination, which was Lexington, Kentucky. So once I got to Lexington, Kentucky, I'm like, okay, this is real, this is happening, I have to accept it. Wahida, drill down and do what you got to do. So I called home one day and I said to my family, send me some money. She said, Wahida, we'll see what we can do. I said, what do you mean you'll see what you can do? I left money there, I left businesses. What do you mean? She said, you're gone. There's no one left to run your businesses. You're not here to hold everybody down. Actually, we're packing up as we speak. You lost your house, you lost your vehicles. No one's running your business. So we got your 2 daughters. So we'll see what we can do. So I hung up from that phone call. Of course, I cried. Then I prayed. My job at the prison, everyone in federal prison has to work unless you have a dire medical permission slip. So my job was I taught computer classes in the evening, and I worked at the library/law library in the morning, 8 to like 1. So after I made that cry and that prayer, a day later, I'm sitting in the library and I'm looking through a magazine, and the magazine had an article. It was a sidebar of a guy who was in prison, and it said that he had written a book called Be More Careful. So I did a double take. I said, wow, this guy is in prison and he wrote a book. Because mind you, I'm thinking about, okay, I got to make some money. It costs money to live in prison. You got to pay to buy your soap powder, pay to wash your clothes. It just costs money. And then I said, when I get out, I got to have a nest egg. How am I going to get a job? So my mind had been reeling. So when I saw this article of this guy that was in prison and he wrote a book, that's when I had my light bulb moment. I'm like, wow, I'm sitting here in prison and I'm working in the library. So I start looking at all the books on the shelves and I start visualizing my name, Wahida Clark, on the spines of the book. And that's when I said, okay, I'm going to write me a book. So lo and behold, after you put it out there in the universe, a sheet of paper goes up, a memo goes up on the board, and it says, creative writing course, sign up. I'm like, creative writing course, wow. So I signed up. I had already started writing, but I took the writing course and the rest is history.
Wow. And so you took the creative writing course, you started writing. Like, what did the process look like? How long did it take you to finish the first book? Was it
right? So now look, in the federal prison, we didn't have computers. There was a little raggedy typewriter. So I had to handwrite my book on yellow legal paper. So that's what I did. I started writing on yellow legal paper. In the meantime, I'm taking this creative writing course and she's telling me, you know, get the literary marketplace, the Writer's Digest, start sending out query letters, start doing this and that and the other, blah, blah, blah. In the meantime, I'm still writing. So while I'm writing on this yellow paper, I have the inmates reading the chapters as I write them. Then all of a sudden the people start waiting for me at the library. I opened at 8 o'clock. They would be down at the library waiting to get the next chapter. So of course that was inspiration. So I kept writing. The creative writing course said you write the literary market, you find your agent. I started writing agents. I got rejection letters, which was fine. I was just happy to get some mail and just happy to get a rejection letter. So I just kept on writing. And by the way, when I came home, one of those agents, Mensa Baron Agency, she had sent me a rejection letter. When I got home from prison, I was invited to New York to sit on a panel, and it was some big wigs, some big dog, Talib Kweli, and some other people. And she was in the audience, and she came up at the end and introduced herself to me. And I was like, wow, you're the one that sent me the rejection letter. And I end up hiring her. She ended up being my second literary agent. And she's still my agent to this day. And that was back in maybe like 2010, maybe. So, but anyway, so I took the writing course in prison. I got my little certificate. I sent out the query letters. I got rejections. Then one night I'm in my cell reading because the writing course instructor, she was an inmate, and her profession on the outside world was a literary agent. So that's why she had the interest of doing a creative writing course. So she had said, Wahida, you got to read the books that you want to write. The genre that you want to write, you need to start reading those books. So I had been reading these books by Carl Weber, and they were awesome. Good, I just slammed it shut. So I wrote him, Dear Carl, my name is Wahida Clark. I don't even have a book title yet. What do you think? Mailed the letter, wasn't expecting to hear back from him. He wrote me back and said he had just started a publishing company and for me to send me the manuscript. So remember, I had handwritten on all this yellow legal paper. I'm like, oh my gosh. So I'm scrambling to get the pages copied because the marketplace said you don't mail out your only copy to your book. So the inmate copy machine was broke. So I began asking the guards, the kitchen staff, the assistant warden, whoever I could find, please make some copies of a copy of these pages so I can send this book home so my family can type it up. So I was able to get the book typed up for my family. They sent it to Carl Weber, and that's when I got my first publishing deal right out the bat. So the first publisher that I ever wrote, they signed my books. But lo and behold, that same publisher, a year before, when I got my first royalty check, while in prison, $25,000, that bad boy bounced. So that was a story with that publishing company. But let me backtrack. So I got it was awesome to get the book published. The book came in the mail because I had got pre-orders from all the inmate girls. They was all waiting because in the acknowledgments, all the prison staff who helped me get the copies, they said, all right, Miss Clark, as long as you put me in acknowledgments, I'll make some copies for you. Give me a shout out. I said, done deal. So they would make the copies. I send them out, put them in acknowledgments. So got my books finally in the mail. My first book, of course, an awesome feeling. But shortly after that, I get called to the lieutenant's office. So I walk in there and they're holding up my book. I'm like, oh my gosh, what is going on? So they wanted to know why and how I was able to get published while in prison. I'm like, duh, you guys gave a creative writing course. I took the course, I got the certificate, I did what I was supposed to do, and I was able to get published. So they sent me back. The next morning, they called me over again to the lieutenant's office. I'm like, oh my gosh, what do they want now? This time there was two of them sitting there, and they was sitting there with handcuffs. They said, we're going to have to take you to the hole/solitary confinement while we investigate how you was able to get this book published, written, typed, published on our watch. I'm like, guys, I told you, you guys gave the writing course. I did what it said to do. I sent the pages home, blah, blah, blah. They said, well, you list our officers in here. Did any of them give you money or did you give them? I said, no, just like it says in acknowledgments, because of the raggedy behind inmate copy machine, I thank you guys for making these copies for me. So they said, well, Ms. Clark, we're going to have to put you in a hole while we investigate how this was to take place. So they put me in the hole for 9 months. But during that time, I was able to start a whole new series because the first series was the Thug series. The second series was the Payback series. So I was able to start that while I was in the hole. And another good thing about the hole, well, they kicked me out of Lexington, Kentucky. They said I couldn't never come back there. And they sent me to Alderson, West Virginia. And of course, when Martha Stewart came through, I was there. I had her look at, by this time, I had Essence Magazine bestsellers, US Today bestseller. I was a celebrity inmate superstar. So with that said, and look, while I was in the hole, Chandler, I had noticed that a lot of the girls, they had pen pals. And it was right in these other prisons, which in the federal system you can't do. They were writing these other prisoners, and they had not only 1, 2, they had like 9, 10, 15 pen pals. So I immediately got on the phone. I said, guys, you got to send me some flyers. So they sent me some flyers. So I gave them to everybody who was writing all these pen pals throughout all the prisons. And then that's how really my book really started taking wings and flying. So, but with that said, once my book started getting popular throughout all the prisons in the country, inmates started sending me mail. They started sending me manuscripts, wanting to know how they could do what I did, which got me in trouble again because they could call me. Even though I was in Alderson, West Virginia, they called me to the lieutenant's office. They're having all this mail. They said, Ms. Clark, you can't run a business while you are in our facility. That is the rules. You cannot run a business. I said, I'm not running a business. My address is in back of the book. And so people are writing me. So I got in trouble again. This time they didn't put me in a hole, but I just lost my living quarters. I lost my phone privileges and my email privileges and my mail privileges. So that went on for a couple of months. And so that's the story of me writing while in prison. But while I was in prison, I landed my literary agent. I landed 2 major publishing deals, one with Kensington first, and the second deal was with Hachette Publishers. So I had 2 of the big 5 while I was in prison. So when I came home from prison, that's when I got my big deal with Simon & Schuster, who had Cash Money content. Cash Money are the guys who have the Lil Wayne, Nicki Minaj. They wanted to get into the publish arena. So they reached out to me to launch their fiction division. And from there, that's when I had my first 3 New York Times bestseller. I had 1, and then with them, I got 3 more. So that's what
Oh,
happened with that. So that's my
so you
story.
had, so how many books had you published while in prison?
When I
And then,
stepped out of prison in June of 2007, I had 7 books published.
oh my gosh. And
I know. I
had you
know.
already
Now I'm
hit,
thinking, I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah, yeah.
had you already hit New York Times while in prison?
Nope, that was when I got home. As soon as I got home from
Yeah.
prison, that was my first New York Times hit. But inside, at the time, Essence magazine, they was doing a monthly bestsellers list. So I was on that list just about every month. The USA Today. Then there was another list called Blackboard or Black something. So it was those lists that I was frequently on during my prison bid.
Mm-hmm. And then how many books would you say you sold while in prison?
Woo! While in prison, you know what? I don't even know. But maybe by the time I got home, I definitely was at the million mark by the time I got home,
No
or
way.
close to it, yeah, and a lot of the stuff wasn't even calculated because, like I said, the first company, they went under. My first
Yeah.
royalty check of $25,000
Yeah.
bounced, so I had to get a whole new publishing company, and then they were bootlegging the books and selling. It was just
Oh,
our
wow.
industry and my niche is very unique.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit. So, man, how did you sell so many books? I mean, because I mean, obviously you've sold even more or even more books since then. But like, what did you do to market the books? I guess I mean, starting from the first 7 books while in prison. Like, how did you market those books? You said
I
sold
know.
so many
I
copies. How did you do
remember
that?
the publicist at Hachette Publishing, Linda Duggins. Big shout out to Linda. She's awesome. I think she's still there as well. She worked with a lot of the big authors. Um, she said, Wahida, you sold more books behind that jail cell than we had people out here in the streets. For me, I believe it was twofold or threefold. Number one, the story resonated with my audience. I know my demographic, I know my audience. So they love the story, they love the characters. Then the prison system is a very powerful network, very powerful network. And you do something good in the prison that the people love, it just goes on and just flourishes out to the outside because the people inside have to call home, send me this book. Then their people is reading the book.
Oh,
So it was just
oh, interesting.
bananas. And
Yeah.
also the genre that I was writing in, street lit, I got in at the top. I was one of the forerunners, forefathers or mothers of that genre. So that also was key.
Hey, Chandler Bolt here. I hope you're loving this episode so far. It's time to go from inspiration to implementation. All right, so if you've learned something, we want to help you implement what you've learned with your book. So, what I want you to do right now is go to selfpublishing.com/schedule, book a publishing consultation with one of the experts on my team. We'll talk about your goals for your book, your dreams, your challenges, your next steps, and we'll start putting together a plan. All right, so go to selfpublishing.com/schedule, book a call with the team. Let's see how we can help with your book. It's time to implement. That's interesting. Now talk to me about, uh, kind of how did you know, hey, this is my avatar, kind of create that genre and then ultimately turn the book into just a wildly popular series? Like, how did you do that?
Okay. Now, for me, knowing my genre and my avatar, I was in prison. And my husband, when I first told my husband, I first got that light bulb moment, I had wrote my husband because he's an author, but he writes not stuff like me. I write the smut. He writes the good stuff. So he was like, Wahida, if you're going to write for money, then you have to write what the establishments buy from us. And that's the pimping, the drugs, the murder. He said some Donald Gowan's Iceberg Slim stuff. Now, Donald Gowan's and Iceberg Slim, my mother used to have those books on her bookshelf when I was in junior high school. I used to go sneak the books and sneak them out of her room. We used to read them in school, me and my girlfriends in the back of the class, study hall, whenever we could sneak and read the books. So I just started writing in that genre. I just knew that demographic. That was my avatar, and that seemed to work.
Yeah. And so how did you turn that into a series? Like, how did you go from one book to a series, and what was kind of
That's
the
a
thought process
very
behind
good
that?
question, Chandler, because, and this is what my husband said, because he said new writers, they can never stop themselves from writing. It goes on and on and on. So my first book, Thugs and the Women Who Love Them, when I sent that to the publisher, Carl Weber, that was his only critique, that it was too big. He said, Wahida, you're going to have to chop this book down. It's too big. I said, no way am I chopping that book down. So we end up having a part one and then a part two. Every thug needs a lady. So I just happenstance fell upon writing a series, a part one and a part two, which in my genre, I was the first one in my genre to do a series. So that's how that happened. And after we cut it to part one and part two, then I had to do the part three and the part four and the part five and the part six and the part seven.
Yeah. And so, I mean, was that based on, it was just selling so well that you're like, okay, let's continue this story? Did you
Yes,
always plan to have 7 books, or?
they love those characters. They love this storyline, and it's 4 girls and 4 guys. So all of them have they have their own personalities, their own lives. So they just wanted more of those characters.
So you didn't plan on making it a full series from the start. You
Nope.
just, oh, interesting. And so how do you do that? How do you go from writing one storyline to then teasing out? So for someone listening who's maybe thinking, oh, I've got a book or two, or maybe they've published it and they're thinking about, kind of transferring to a series. How do you keep that going and not feel like, oh man, I've written everything I could write about here. Like, let's start a different series, or let's write in a different, different characters, like all that.
Right, because I had to do that for payback, but the other series is payback. When I was in a hole, it's, to me, it's inspiration, and you have to know from the beginning that you want to drag it out and turn it into a series. So that always helps if you have that in your mind. Unfortunately, I didn't have that in my mind. I just said, look, this book is big. I'm not going to cut anything. You just have to turn it into 2 parts. But the Payback series, while I was in a hole, I noticed the characters that were coming. I mean, these were some, I was in a federal women's camp. So they don't have solitary confinement on the premises. They send you to the local county jail. So they sent me to the local county jail where we were locked down 23 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it was like in this bubble, real cold. So that's how I met the other girls. So a county jail, all types of people, constant. It's like a revolving door every weekend. All types of people. And these people were colorful. So that's why I got the inspiration to start the new series, Payback is the Mother, from the characters that was coming in the county jail. And so since that already had part 1 and part 2 to the Thug series, I said I was going to do the part 1 and then another part 2 to the Payback series. Now the Payback series, after the third one or the second one, I said, there's nothing else I can do. But it was the inmates, the girls on the inside said, no, Wahida, there is more that you can do. So that's what would inspire me to add 2 more books to it. So now the Payback series is 4 books, but I didn't see it. It sometimes it take your readers to tell you there's more. I was like, I argue back and forth. I'm like, no, there is no. They said, yes, there is some more. So I didn't even realize it.
And that's such a great takeaway for people. And I mean, talk about getting to know your readers. You were literally living with them.
Exactly.
And they're giving you feedback and they're reading the book, they're giving you feedback. So it's just like such a, talk about turning lemons into lemonade. It's you're living in it and you're getting the real-time feedback, which I'm sure has just made the book so much better.
Yes.
Turn into like this. Wow. That's so awesome. How do you, any tips for people who are writing series as well on like, how do you keep people engaged in reading through the series? Because I looked at your books on Amazon, and it's like 400 and something reviews, 400 something reviews, 400 something, like every book, it feels like, from a reviews perspective, which I know that's not, they've probably sold at different levels, but But from a reviews perspective, it's like, man, this, it's not like, you know, you go and look at a bunch of series and it's like book 1, 1,000 reviews, book 2, 500 reviews, book 3, 100 reviews. But, you know, it's just like, it feels like that. And I know that Bella on my team has said, Wahida is just unbelievable at creating raving fans. And so any tips on creating raving fans? And then also, like, how do you get people to keep reading throughout the entire series?
For me, 2 things have worked for me. Your story. You have to have that compelling story that your avatar just got to have. I just got to have more. I got to have more. And when you have that, then it's once your avatar raises their hand and introduces themselves to you, you got to engage and you got to keep them engaged. That's the only 2 things that work for me.
Nice. And how do you do that? Like any tips for other fiction writers on how to keep keep the story flowing, then how to keep the engagement up?
Well, to keep the story flowing, like I said, you have to know in your head, and you talk to your readers and you listen to your readers on whether you can keep the story going or not, or end it, because they will tell you when to end it. They will tell you, all right, did this, it's a wrap, we're done with it. Or they'll tell you to keep going. So I listen to my readers. And as far as the engagement, I answer their emails and their letters and their fan mail, and try to do the social media. Is you just have to engage. Simple as that. You can't. I just a new author I talked to today. Oh yeah, okay, right. It's one of my old authors who has a new book. He wrote 2 fiction books. Now he just finished his first nonfiction book. So I said, his name is Mr. Adams. So I said, look, bottom line is, because he was like, should I put a picture on there? I said, it all depends. But listen, you're doing a nonfiction book. You're going to have to be ready to work. You can't just write the book and think it's just going to sell. You have to set up your game plan. You have to set up the strategy. You have to set up your social media post. You have to set up a fan page on Facebook. You're going to have to be out there engaging with the people. You have to get the eyeballs. If you get eyeballs, you'll get some engagement. And that's all. It doesn't get no simpler than that. You just have to engage and just talk to your people and be available for the people, even if it's just once or twice a week. You have to be available and engage with your readers and be active on social media. That works for me. I don't know what works for other people, but that's my formula.
So engaging with the audience, constantly getting feedback. That's great.
Yeah.
What any tips, like I mean, it seems like you know your niche, you know your audience, like just so well, and you write to that audience. And it seems like you've been very intentional about, okay, I'm going to write books in this genre to my target avatar. And it's a very specific avatar. Like, have you ever thought about going outside of that? Or it seems like there's some intentionality, which why stay in that genre and really focus on that niche?
That is such a wonderful question. I'm glad you brought it up, because this pandemic has, because we have the publishing company. While I was in prison, everybody was sending me manuscripts, so I end up forming my own publishing company, Wahida Clark Presents Publishing. And right before Martha Stewart left, I said, Martha, you got to look at my business plan. I need you to look at my business plan before you step out of here, which she did. So now, Wahida Clark Presents Publishing. During this COVID, this pandemic, it's crazy. So I just was telling somebody last night, like we had a chalkboard with all this writing on it. So we erased the whole chalkboard, took a clean cloth, wiped it all down, and now we're writing on it brand new. So what we've done, I've just hired a team, and during the pandemic, I penned Emperors and Assassins, a fantasy title. I also penned Loners, another fantasy title. Then we just brought on some new authors, a Black sci-fi, African-American sci-fi writer. So we set up a whole new imprint, and we just pulling in different genres. But I am now, and I just released my new erotica book, Don't Mess with the Quiet Chick. I just released that yesterday. That just released yesterday. So now I'm into erotica and fantasy.
Holy cow. How do you do it all?
General, I don't know. Chandler, I really don't know. Definitely the team. Me by
Yeah.
myself, it ain't happening. It's the team.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So at what point at what point
And
did
we
you?
have some nonfiction stuff. Some, the
Yeah.
celebrities. I got some
Yeah.
celebrity books that we are releasing as well.
That's awesome. At what point, because it remind me, like, at what point did you come into the self-publishing school world? How did you find us? Like, why did you decide to start working with us?
I don't even remember when I stumbled upon the self-publishing school, but it was a while ago. Then I fell off and then got an email something and I wanted to get back. That's when me and my assistant, we flew out to the
Mm-hmm.
training. And what caught my attention with self-publishing school is the systems that you have in place, because you guys do what I was trying to do. Because with my lot of authors and small publishers, they reach out for me to publish them and whatnot, but their books doesn't fit what I do, or their work ethic doesn't fit the way we hustle and grind.
Yeah.
So we set up what's called W. Clark distribution, where you give us the titles, because a lot of them will consult with you on your cover design, your interior, and everything, and getting it out there listed on Amazon and the distribution. So when I saw self-publishing school with you guys, I said, "Oh my gosh, it's just so perfect, cookie cutter." That's what I was hoping. I said, when I came, I said, "Okay, we're going to have to combine you guys. I need to use you guys for the back end, and I just bring in the customers and like that." So that's how I came upon self-publishing school. You guys have very good content, which I do use and implement. But when I really saw the system that you had, I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is it right here."
That's cool. That's awesome. And so you guys heard about Author Advantage Live, and you came to Author Advantage Live in Austin, Texas
Yep.
last year. And then we worked together as part of the accelerator. What have been kind of like, what have been your top 2 or 3 takeaways or biggest things that you've learned kind of since we've been working together?
My 2 top takeaways is, again, your system, how you have everything in place for the independent author or small publisher. Everything is in place. I mean, from A to Z. The other thing was the people that you have on your team. Awesome, motivated, just always on point. That's my type of people. So those were the things that have you, up there for me.
Cool. That's awesome. And it sounds like you're building an amazing team as well, which is just cool.
And
That's what
learning
it's all
from you
about.
guys.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. Check out, I don't know if you've ever checked this out, or I feel like I maybe mentioned it to you, but 7-Figure Principles podcast and the 7-Figure Principles show, just as you're growing, it's a kind of a side podcast. That's just a fun side project, but it's like the principles and systems that I use to grow and scale my company. And I teach a lot of things there. So
7
that's
principles. I will check that out.
7-Figure
7
Principles
principles podcast.
podcast. Yeah. 7-Figure
Gotcha.
Principles podcast there. And then also 7-Figure Principles show is kind of the YouTube version, just depending on whether you like video or audio better, but that's kind of on both places. Well, cool. Hey, it's been inspiring seeing your growth, Wahida. It's amazing. You are such an inspiring person. I'd love to just ask a couple final questions.
Sure.
What would be your parting tips or pieces of advice? So, like, knowing what you know now. So imagine all the other Wahidas out there listening to this, and knowing what you know now to the Wahida that was like pre-book number 1. What would be your advice for folks who want to create a successful fiction series and who want to write their first book?
Study the craft, master the craft, because writing is a craft. And one of my favorite books on writing is called Immediate Fiction by Jerry Cleaver. So everybody that writes fiction on my team, I make that a mandatory read. I don't know, it's because it's my style, and to me, I have ADD they call it. If you don't get me in the first 5-10 pages of the book, then you don't have me. And that's how I write. And I expect, and that's what the people who read my books expect to write, because it was so challenging with the publishing company and my books, getting my readers to read the books that I publish. That was a huge obstacle. So study the craft, write. And that's the main thing, study the craft and write.
That's awesome. Wahida, that's amazing. Such a great interview. Final question: where can people go to find out more about you, find your books, and kind of what you're up to?
Fantastic. I'm everywhere. Books are sold, but go to the website wclarkpublishing.com. All the books are there. Everything is on my website that I'm doing is on the website. Has the links to all the books. We have new authors coming out. One of my nonfiction authors, her son's show, it's a mystery that's coming out on Bounce TV and Court TV on November the 1st. It's called Dying to Be Famous. So that's going to be interesting. And also have some other celebrity clients. And just the new stuff is the daggone sci-fi and erotica and my podcast show that I'm finalizing. So I'm just doing a lot, Chandler. I can't keep up. So that's why having a good, solid team around you is key. Yeah. People that work like you work. And like Maya Angelou says, if someone shows you who they are, believe it. So a team you got to have a solid team. Have your paperwork together, your contracts, your legal papers, have that stuff intact. That's one thing I learned as well. And I thought it was one of the things, I forgot what it was, but okay, so team, study the craft, and just treat people the way you want it to be treated, and do good business, because you do good business and treat people right, it comes back to you. Yeah, that's amazing. Wahida, you're awesome and super inspiring. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for having me, and I look forward to getting with you guys again and checking out the 7 Principle podcast. I'm looking forward to that. Now you got me really hyped now, because I'm all about systems and getting everything together. So I can't wait to check that out. That'll be a good one. Thanks again. All right. Thank you. Have a good one. Thank you so much for watching or listening to this episode of the Self-Publishing School podcast. I know there's so many places that you can be spending your time. There's other podcasts that you could be listening to, YouTube channels that you could be watching. So thank you so much. It means the world. Now, I want you to do 3 things right now if you found this episode helpful. All right, number 1, I don't know if you know this, but we've got a YouTube channel. It's a companion channel to this podcast. All the video versions of the episode are on the YouTube channel. So number 1, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Number 2, if you're listening to this podcast wherever, whether this is Spotify, Apple Podcasts, number 2, I want you to subscribe to this podcast right now so you don't miss a future episode. And then number 3, this is probably the most important, leave a review on the podcast. All right, reviews are super important and help the podcast get discovered by other people. So number 3, leave a review on the podcast. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next episode. If you're on the fence about scheduling a publishing consultation call with my team, maybe you're not quite ready for that, I've got some free training that I think will be really helpful for you. All right, all you have to do is go to register to sign up. Go to selfpublishing.com/free training. When you do, you're also going to get a free digital copy of my new book published. And on that training, you're going to learn the next steps of how to implement with your book. So how to write, how to publish, how to launch successfully. So go to register right now at selfpublishing.com/free training. I'll see you there.